Hello guys, Luke here and welcome back to the channel. Today we will be discussing which Game Boy Advance variant is the best. Starting with the original Game Boy Advance that launched in 2001, I myself as a kid was lucky enough to get a brand new one at launch. I got an indigo see-through purple one, similar to this black one, just a purple one instead. And my first game I got for the Game Boy Advance was Pitfall: The Mayan Adventure, but I also got alongside it Pokemon Yellow. So weird that I got a Game Boy Advance and Pokemon Yellow, a Game Boy game, alongside the Game Boy Advance, but I was stoked. I obviously played a lot of Pokemon Yellow, barely played Pitfall to be honest. It was a good game, I think. It's just that the Pokemon craze was hot and heavy back then. This I'm talking 2001, so like a year prior we had gotten Gold, Silver, and Crystal. So yeah, Pokemon was at its highest peak. Now, yes, one of the biggest gripes with the original Game Boy Advance is that it didn't have a backlit screen. This one, of course, is a IPS modded one, so it does have a backlit screen. But just imagine this, was way like the brightness was set to 1%. Basically, that's what you were playing at with the original Game Boy Advance. This one is a reshelled. It doesn't have a custom battery pack, just running AA's, but that is a mod I'm looking to do soon on this Game Boy. But yeah, just a reshelled IPS screen Game Boy Advance. Yes, the battery life isn't as good, but I would rather have a backlight and 1 hour of battery than no backlight and 5 hours of battery. That's how I game, because I don't mind sticking some batteries and a charger on the wall and just swapping them out when I get low. Now, one thing that was good about the original Game Boy Advance was the ergonomics. It was incredibly comfortable to hold in your hands. Even myself, now a 36-year-old adult, still plays this Game Boy Advance from time to time. The D-pad, while a little bit squishy, it does the job. Most of the games, you don't have to do diagonals in a lot of games anyway on the GBA. This was also nicknamed the portable SNES, the portable Super Nintendo, because a lot of its greatest games are Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. We had the Super Mario Advance series of games, which are basically just the original Mario games from the SNES and the NES ported up to the Game Boy Advance. So yeah, this thing was a NES and SNES machines, even though, weirdly enough, they ported so many SNES games to this console, but they did away with the X and Y buttons for some reason. I'm not sure why they did that. I guess they wanted to stick with the original Game Boy format. You got select and start down here, B and A here. You had triggers this time though, so Game Boy Color did not have triggers. Now we have really comfortable big shoulder buttons, although they weren't too useful. Again, mostly for SNES games, I think, that were ported over. But for most of the Game Boy games, like for Pokemon and stuff, basically you could use L and R to like play. For example, you could play Pokemon one-handed by setting L to the A button in the settings, and then you could just play one-handed like this, move around the world and press A with the L trigger. That way you can play one-handed for things like that. A lot of the actual Game Boy games that were made for this thing didn't really utilize the triggers too much. Now, another awesome thing about the original Game Boy Advance model is that the cartridge slot is on top, meaning you don't have games in your way. If we take a look here at the Game Boy Advance SP that came out a few years after, obviously the cartridge port is in the bottom. Now, it doesn't matter too much if you're playing Game Boy Advance titles, as these fit snugly with the Game Boy shell here. But if you are playing something like Pokemon Gold or Pokemon Crystal or something like that, or like Mario Brothers, the original Mario Brothers on Game Boy, the cartridge does stick out the bottom, and so that can interfere with your hands while playing sometimes. I guess it doesn't really interfere too much if you're playing like this. The cartridge sits there. Actually, it might even help with ergonomics a little bit sometimes, I guess, with the other fingers here doing nothing. They can just rest on the cartridge, I guess. But yeah, it was definitely better having the cartridge slot in the top. That way nothing got in your way when playing whichever version of Game Boy game you're playing. Now, like I said at the start of this video, we are here today to decide which is the definitive best Game Boy Advance model. So we've talked enough about the original Game Boy Advance model. A lot of the pros, of course, are the ergonomics, cartridge slot being on top. But of course, we have some cons, like no backlit screen, no rechargeable battery. And the next Game Boy Advance model, the SP, solves most of our issues here. So let's put this aside and look at the SP closer now. Now, this is also a reshelled Game Boy Advance SP. Let's turn it on here. Now, this SP started life as an AGS 001 model, so it means it didn't have the good backlight. AGS 101 came out a little bit later, like a year or whatever, 6 months later, and had a way more improved backlit screen. Obviously, this is an IPS screen, so of course it's going to look great. Again, the battery life does suffer a little bit, but again, I'll take better screen over better battery life any day with my Nintendo handhelds. But the Game Boy Advance SP launched in 2003 to much acclaim. Of course, we did away with the disposable batteries. Now we had a lithium-ion battery running at 5.2 volt. And of course, we have a backlit screen. And you can toggle it with this button here in the middle, on and off. Obviously, on the IPS swap models, this changes the brightness and contrast and other things. But we still didn't have extra buttons. We still have A and B here. This is obviously a Super Famicom-inspired model. So, of course, you got the green and blue buttons on top, red and yellow on the front to match the Super Famicom. It's quite a cool design, actually. It's a custom SP shell. This never came out from Nintendo directly, but I wish it had. It's a really nice design. So one of the flaws of this system, of course, is the Game Boy Advance slot here. When you put Game Boy and Game Boy Color games in, they do stick out towards you. So this can affect you if, say, you're playing like on your back in bed and you've got it resting on your midriff. Even if you're laying on your side, because this is actually why I play the SP quite a bit. I'll switch from the normal GBA to the SP, is to, when I'm lying in bed on my side, this is a way more comfortable console to lie on your side with because it is so compact. Whereas the normal GBA here, lying on your side, your palms don't really sit on each other, you know what I mean? It's a bit harder to play on your side in bed. But when you lie in bed on your side with the SP, your palms sort of sit together and it's way more comfortable to play on your side. So it really just differs what kind of seating position or laying position you're playing your GBA games in. So I swap between all three models, to be fair. I do have a favorite and we will get there, but yeah, back to the SP. So of course we got the backlit screen now, we've got the rechargeable battery, but the SP model did forego the headphone jack, which was a big deal for some people, but it wasn't for others. Most people did not use the headphone jack. I mean, they could have squeezed one on here, although from Nintendo you could buy a third-party accessory that went from the link cable port to a 3.5 headphone jack female port, so you could still get headphones plugged into the SP. It just took another adapter you had to buy separately to get that functionality. Now to the ergonomics of the SP. Now, while a lot of people praise the clamshell design, means you're not going to scratch your screen up in your pocket, it is way more pocketable than the original GBA. The GBA is a lot bigger footprint, probably about 40% larger than this, but this thing was way more easy to carry around in your pocket. Now to get that functionality, we did forego some of the ergonomic features, of course. We have these tiny little L and R buttons, like really small, like I don't know what they'd be, like the size of a, I don't know, chocolate covered sultana or something. That's the size of the L buttons compared to the Game Boy Advance. The D-pad, while it was a lot more tactile and clicky, it didn't feel as nice as the squishy one from the GBA. The select and start buttons, they didn't protrude enough from the console because this is a clamshell design. You didn't want the buttons to stick up, of course, because the screen's gonna hit them before it closes, right? Well, the select and start became a lot harder to hit because they are recessed into the machine a tiny bit. The B and A buttons, I don't really have much of a gripe with them. They are still nice to hit. They are clicky, of course, compared to the GBA's squishy A and B buttons. But of course, the GBA buttons, they stick up a lot more. They're a lot more satisfying to press. Let me see if I can do a quick audio test of these. I'll try and keep everything quiet and just do the button test. So the SP came out in 2003, 2 years after the GBA. And then 2 years after that, in 2005, we had the GB Micro. Probably most people's least favorite Game Boy Advance model. It is also my least favorite, mostly because of how small the damn thing is. This was a perk back in the day when I was a kid. Obviously, this wasn't as small to me as it is now. I did really like the buttons. They're still a bit clicky like the SP, but they're actually a bit spongy like the GBA. It's like a good medium ground, you know? The D-pad was also very decent. Also sort of a hybrid between the SP and the Game Boy Advance. It's squishy yet tactile. The select and start though, I don't have much to say in praise about these two, but these were probably the hardest select and start buttons to press on a console ever. The L and R buttons, while large in footprint, actually have a very small area to click in. So if you see here, if I'm holding it like on the side, it's very hard to like click. It sounds like I'm clicking them, right? I'm not actually activating them like on the corners here. I have to click in a bit. I tried to make it like the GBA L and R buttons, but like the actual spot to press them is more like the SP. Now, of course, we get some of the perks of the SP in this. We get the backlit screen. Oh yeah, I haven't turned it on yet. Let's turn it on. This model does have a bit of a yellowing effect on the bottom half of the screen. It is, I don't know how it yellowed. Actually must have seen some sunlight at some point. I did buy the secondhand in Japan when I went there earlier this year. And yeah, you don't really notice when you're playing games. Obviously on a white screen like this, like a mostly white screen, you can see how the bottom half of the screen is like yellowed a little bit. I don't know if you can see that on camera. Yeah, we've got the backlit screen, of course. It's one of the best backlit screens on a handheld, in my opinion. Of course, we get the rechargeable battery, which you can now charge with a different connector. Not sure why they changed the connector. It means you had to buy a new cable for this GB Micro. A lot of the micros you bought in store didn't come with a charge cable. You had to buy it separately. Again, quite annoying. Like this Super Famicom 20th anniversary Mario GB Micro came in the box without a charge cable. I had to add one to the box. Now, unlike the SP, they actually managed to add the headphone jack back in. So see over here, we have a headphone jack again. They could have done with the SP model. They could have fit one in somewhere on the bottom. They could have moved the cartridge slot maybe over a little bit. The cartridge slot is dead center. they could have moved it a little bit off center to fit a headphone jack in one side, like either of the sides, like they sort of did with the micro. The cartridge slot isn't centered, as you can see. We've got the on and off switch here, and the headphone jack there, and the cartridge slot is sort of off to the right side. One of the biggest gripes, of course, with the GB Micro, it doesn't play Game Boy Color games, which was, I don't know what Nintendo were thinking. They could have definitely allowed it to play. Now, of course, the cartridge slot is in the bottom, just like the SP, which means the cartridge would have stuck out towards you. Another bit of a gripe I have with this thing. That if you could even put a Game Boy Color cartridge in it, it would stick out towards you. They put in little tabs, meaning you couldn't play Game Boy Color or Game Boy cartridges in your GB Micro, which I think is a big letdown for this system. I think they would have sold a lot more of these systems if they had the backwards compatibility, just like they had with the Game Boy Advance and SP. But yeah, the main problem with the Micro now, of course, for people with big hands like myself, I've got pretty massive hands, is the Micro, I can play comfortably for about half an hour, and then it starts to get pretty uncomfortable. It is also not as easy to play on your side. I mean, you can. It's similar to the SP, the button spacing. So you can play on your side, although, yeah, it is a tiny screen. You have to really have this close to your face. So I think in our quest to find the best GBA model, we'll have to discount the Micro already. Even though I love this console still, I have a soft spot for it, and I do get it out every now and then to play some games on it. It just doesn't have that backwards compatibility. That's what really killed this thing. I think this thing would have been amazing, because it's so pocketable, like even more pocketable than the SP. The SP is like, I don't know, another third larger in footprint. This is obviously longer. It's more ergonomic hold as well. That's what I like about it, is I find it more ergonomic than the SP. But yeah, the buttons felt great. The screen was incredible. I once took a Game Boy Micro on an 8-hour bus trip, and I wasn't even worried about battery life, honestly. I was playing like Pokemon Ruby the whole time. I also had my headphones plugged in because I could do it on this console. See, I was one back in the day. I jumped from the GBA straight to the Micro. I actually didn't have an SP, and this was such a huge jump for me. Of course, I still had my GBA hanging around for when I wanted to play Game Boy and Game Boy Color games. So let's get the Micro out of the way, guys. This is not going to be a contender for best Game Boy Advance console. It is definitely between these two handhelds right here, which will be the best GBA. Well, of course, we've already gone through how the original GBA did not have a backlit screen. Of course, once you add a backlit screen to the GBA, and if you want to add a rechargeable battery pack to here as well, you can buy them. You can buy just rechargeable packs that charge off USB-C or micro USB, and you've basically got an SP with all the best things about it. But just imagine this is not backlit, guys. So like, that's for me a deal breaker, really. The SP with its backlight, even though this is an IPS screen, the original backlight wasn't as good as this, I would still take the SP over the GBA. However, I actually have two more Game Boy Advance consoles that we need to look at. Now, I call them consoles. I'm using that term very loosely. But anyway, I'm amazed. Instead of talking about it, I'll just show you. All right, guys, I want to take a quick pause in today's video to talk about today's sponsor, coffee. Just drink more coffee, it's good for you. Look, guys, I'm wearing glasses, means I'm smart and know what I'm talking about. So just drink coffee, it's good for you, trust me. Okay, in front of me, we have two more options when it comes to playing Game Boy Advance. Now, I did sort of wrongly call them Game Boy Advance models. They're not really Game Boy Advance models. I mean, this Game Boy player here for the GameCube does actually have a Game Boy Advance inside, the internals of a Game Boy Advance in this thing. And we have here a DS Lite. Now, of course, you could use the regular DS as well. This is a bit of a banged up system here I just have lying around, but this, of course, has your DS slot on top for the DS games, and we have an Advance slot. Now, again, just like the Micro, this slot couldn't play Game Boy and Game Boy Color games. This is why I can basically discount the DS as well. I believe if you're going to have the ultimate Game Boy Advance, you're going to have the ultimate backwards compatibility. The DS is definitely a good contender, but yeah, just like the Micro, it doesn't play Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, so that's why I'm going to have to discount it as the ultimate Game Boy Advance. And here in front of me, we have an Indigo Game Boy player for the GameCube. Now, this is one of the ultimate ways, in my opinion, to play Game Boy Advance, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy games as well. You can play them on your TV, which means you'll have backlit, you'll have good audio, you have good visuals as well, because of course you can play it, you can really put whatever visuals you want. With the GameCube these days, you can put a HDMI GC video module on the back of it in a DOL 001 system, and you can get basically the best picture you can ever imagine. So as you can see, it's fully functional. It's got your slot here. This will take any of the GB Color, GBA games, and you still have your link cable port here. So you can actually trade Pokemon. Like back in the day, I had a Game Boy Advance and a Game Boy player for my GameCube, and I didn't have any friends at the time that had the Pokemon games I was playing and wanted to trade in, and so I would trade with myself. I would just put my Emerald copy in here, and I would put my Ruby copy in my GBA, and link cable between, I'd be able to trade my Pokemon across. One of the downsides of this system is that you had to have this little silly disc to launch your games on. I wish they did away with this and just had like the ability to launch Game Boy just in the firmware of the GameCube. That way you wouldn't have to bloody find one of these for $200 these days. These discs, they go for quite a lot of money these days. You can find them anywhere from sort of $150 to $250. But in all honesty, I can't really call the Game Boy Player, as much as I love its ability to play, really, you get the best visuals and audio out of your Game Boy games, I cannot really call it the best Game Boy Advance console. Again, you need a whole other console to play this thing. Like, this launched back in the day at, I think, $50, so it was quite cheap. You're buying a Game Boy Advance system for $50. But yes, you had to already own a Nintendo GameCube to run it. So unfortunately, I'm also going to have to discount the Game Boy Player as the ultimate Game Boy Advance. Although a lot would consider it the ultimate. I mean, I kind of do, in a way. But of course, if you want to just pick up a Pokemon Emerald and play where you left off, it's a lot easier just to grab your GBA or GBA SP and just put your Emerald cartridge in and go ahead and play anywhere you want. That was probably the only gripe with the Game Boy Player, is that you were locked to your TV, basically, or to your monitor or whatever you were playing on. So guys, it all comes down to these two. Pretty much for the backwards compatibility. Yes, the Game Boy Player had backwards compatibility, but it did lock you to your TV, whereas these were pocketable. You could carry them anywhere. You just either charge them up or swap in fresh AA's to keep going. Just very convenient. Obviously, on the one hand here, you have better ergonomics and you have a headphone jack. On this end of the scale, you have rechargeable batteries and you have the backlit screen. Now, it was very hard, but to choose between these two is like choosing between two kids, right? I love the ergonomics of this thing. This thing is so comfortable to hold. Just even for my massive hands today, like, you know, as an adult, this is still way more comfortable to actually hold and play. Whereas the SP is just, it's just too small. I end up getting sore hands maybe after an hour of playing. Again, depends what game you're playing. If you are playing a Pokemon game and you do the L to A button swap, you can just one hand this like this, and it's not too bad. Just using the D-pad and L to A button. Pokemon games aren't the only games on the Game Boy Advance, okay? So while a lot of us think that, a lot of us treat this as a Pokemon machine, it's not just that. I play other games. I play Harry Potter games. I play Metroid games. I play many other games, like Zelda games. But my ultimate verdict, guys, I think if I had to choose only one of these to play forever, it would have to be the SP. It is the ultimate Game Boy Advance console. Unfortunately, I would love to give it to the GB. Of course, I would choose this any day if it came like this back in the day. If it came with a backlit screen like this would be a no-brainer. But the one big deal breaker with this, of course, it didn't have the backlit screen at launch. You had to do, back in the day, I had a worm light, so I had to plug a little light into my trade link cable port here and have it over the screen so I could actually see what I was doing. Whereas the GBA SP just came with a backlit screen out of the box. Again, you could toggle it with this button here. Obviously on this model, this just brightens it or dims it, as you can tell here. So yeah, that's my verdict, guys. I would actually choose, if I had to choose one GBA model to play forever and no others, I would have to choose the SP, unfortunately. It just is the better overall console. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today's video on which is the best GBA model. I've got my pick. I wonder what your pick is too. Let me know down in the comments. Which is your GBA of choice, which one you grew up with, which one you've got now, which do you prefer for various reasons. Maybe I missed a few reasons here and there in the video. I might have forgotten a few pros and cons for each system. So let me know any extras that I missed. And that's going to do it for today's video, guys. This has been Lukewarm Cup of Coffee. I hope you did enjoy. If you did, leave a like down below, subscribe on content like this, and I'll see you guys around the channel. All right, have a good one.